I was on stream with my friends playing some D&D when some news I kind of jokingly revealed early by accident dropped, which was that a new left party was going to be formed in the UK, triggered by the resignation of Zara Sultana, MP for Coventry South, and generally a person regarded as one of the highest profile and stronger communicators on the left in Parliament, who has decided to co-lead the founding of this party with former Labour leader, manhole cover enthusiast, jam maker, and all around good guy, Jeremy Corbyn, the formerly independent MP for Islington North, or I should say soon to be formerly independent, I suppose. At the time of recording, this is still relatively new information, and there will be a lot of information to come. I'm sure over the course of editing, there will be a lot of twists and turns to come, which is fine. I'm not a current affairs channel. I'm not dexterous enough for all that, but this topic is one where I feel compelled to give an opinion, to answer some questions that will inevitably rise, and to sort out my own thoughts. So why not do that on camera? Because for all my fatigue, for all my jadedness, for all that I swear that I am done with party politics, I do feel a pull towards this, and it might be useful, it might be clarifying, both for myself and hopefully for you to hear some thoughts about this spoken out loud. So that's what this is, just some thoughts, some questions, maybe what I think the answers are to some of those questions, as well as some traps that I think all of us can avoid when we talk about this, or whenever this mysterious entity gets off the ground. I also want to say that this is going to be my first video back after a little break, and some of you will know what happened, but everyone was very kind about it, and I want to thank you all for that. I appreciate that I've cultivated an audience that understands that sometimes things happen, and that means that things have to be paused for a bit, and you can't bring yourself to do whatever it is you had planned. It's good to be back. Also, just to emphasize this point, this is a topic that is evolving pretty much all the time, so this is entirely speculation based on vague information, but I'm going to do it anyway because that's youtube.com for you. A question that inevitably comes up when you speak about the idea of a new left party, and that I think will come up now, is do we really need a new party? And that's not an unreasonable question. If we're talking about parties, there are not only a bunch of small left-wing parties, but also a series that were founded post-2019 who never really got anywhere. Now, these failures have a lot of factors behind them, but the cold truth is that the legacy of new party of the left, or, just forget about the left part of it, just new party in British politics is traditionally one of failure at best and humiliating disgrace at worst, which means it's always a question that's asked in a kind of loaded way with failure baked into it. And I suppose it's worth addressing because I've kind of kept my cards close on whether I would actually do something like this or not. People can correct me who've watched the other videos, but at most, I've said what I would do if I were in a position to decide, and never really said whether I would or wouldn't do it. Mainly because it felt too tangential to whatever I was discussing at any one time. I'll give some thoughts, but let's look at what the precedents are here. And not just because it gives me the chance to talk about something that was very, very funny. Like, the obvious first place people will go is to the breakaway of the Labour right MPs that would eventually go on to become the Independent Group for Change, or Change UK, or the Cucks. For such a short-lived party, they existed under a lot of names, and they are very much an example of forming a new party leading to humiliating disgrace. Not only did none of them retain their seats at the 2019 election, none of the three candidates they ran, who were incumbent MPs, got more than 9% of the vote. Why is this where people go when they think of a new party that involves at least one breakaway MP? Well, it's the last time it happened, and both Change UK and the hypothetical new party, amusingly represented in this Britain Elects post as Corb, both had rather promising polling when offered as an option, which has led to a lot of people pointing out, not incorrectly, that the British public are really bad at hypothetical polls. It's just hard to measure sentiment around something that as yet doesn't exist. And that's not pollsters' fault, or even Change UK or this hypothetical new party's fault. That's just life. We don't really know how people will behave until they're in that scenario. Even in an election where Change UK did run a full slate of candidates, they only got 3.3% of the vote in the 2019 European Parliament elections. An election where a party obsessed with both the EU and undermining the left should have had an advantage due to the kind of person who would turn out for that election. Those people preferred, by some margin, the Lib Dems. Hell, they preferred Labour by some margin, and they didn't exactly do good in that election. At this point, the signs aren't great. Change UK failed because it was a party that was both unnecessary, a centrist pro-EU party dedicated to chasing the opinion of journalists with the intent to undermine Labour, that already existed in the form of the Lib Dems. And they had neither a strong existing political brand, given all of the name changes and that dreadful logo, or a real constituency among the public. Say what you want, but the public were not rushing to the polls to support Mike Gapes, a man who abandoned his then wife at the hospital in order to make sure he voted in favour of the Iraq War. One of the differences, and the case here for this new party, which let's just call it the Corb from now on because I can't keep saying hypothetical new party, is that there is a constituency among the public for this kind of politics. If you look at public opinion on almost any policy area, the British public do not have a major political party to vote for. For example, on Gaza, there is no party that consistently opposes the genocide of Palestinians other than the Greens, who we'll talk about in a bit, but the Greens are clearly not scooping up all of that body of public opinion, so they're not adequately represented currently in the party political system. The other major difference, and what I think is the most important one, is that in the case of Change UK, none of their MPs had proven they could win in their own seats without the Labour or Tory parties backing them. In fact, every defector from Labour and the Conservatives lost their seats, whoever they ran for. The MPs who are likely to form at least some part of the Corb, which will likely involve all 5 of the Independent Alliance MPs, and 4 of those were, meaning no offence to any of them, no-name guys who unseated Labour in extremely safe and traditionally Labour seats. There is clearly some body of public opinion, even in deeply pro-Labour areas, that wants something else enough that it could win more MPs than the Green Party as a disorganised mass filing in behind independents. Sometimes there were multiple independents running in these seats, by the way. This body of public opinion also led to some of the most credible independent performances in UK history. Wes Streeting was only about 500 votes from being unseated after all. On that basis, there's clearly a segment of people willing to vote who aren't being sufficiently represented in our 5-ish party system that the Corb could tap into. The other argument against the necessity of the Corb, or something like the Corb, is the massive amount of left of Labour political parties that already exist. Now, I want to exclude the Greens from this discussion because I want to talk about them specifically in their own little bit. This isn't coming from a place of factual inaccuracy. There are so many left of Labour projects that just evaporate eventually. Even ones that have success only really have limited ones and achieve them in short bursts before they burn out. These parties are often just sitting there, not doing much of anything, because how would they be doing anything? Or they've long since been disbanded. So the weight of history is not one that is pointing to success. Even earnest attempts that really try to tap into an existing public sentiment just aren't guaranteed to succeed, and belief isn't enough. Which sucks to say, but not everything is about using the Force to blow up the Death Star. Sometimes the hill is too steep to roll the boulder up. Okay, I'm mixing analogies here, but you get it. This has been tried before, and virtually every attempt has failed. There are, however, some examples we could look at as new parties, even breakaway parties, that have succeeded in some way. The SDP split, which the Change UK split was sometimes compared to, But I think even the British press realised that the calibre of the politicians involved was quite different between the two. It did result in the eventual formation of the Liberal Democrats through its alliance with the Liberal Party. They arguably provided the first major threat to the two-party order in the post-war era. In 1983, they were only 2% away from overtaking Labour as the alliance. What was the fruit of this alliance? Well, in only 29 years, the Liberal Democrats would enter government as the junior party to the Conservatives and would assist them in their program of austerity, social murder, and redistribution of wealth to the richest in society. So that's not great, and I'm not saying that the Corb's inevitable path would be towards this kind of outcome, but it's not a story with a happy ending, unless you're Ed Davey, I guess. But when is that guy ever unhappy? The other example I would consider a success, and there's a bit more going on here than being a breakaway, and we can argue precisely how new they are now, or not new, or what their legacy is that they're drawing on, but Reform UK, which descends from a long line of parties that operated under various names, are arguably a successful new party if we sort of define that as not the traditional parties. Now, one might point to the general fiasco that is Reform. For example, Reform's whip in Parliament in effect removed the whip from himself over some COVID loan-related allegations, which is very funny, and despite all of this, they are still leading in the polls, but you have to ask at some point, what are we doing, right? I also think, before we get carried away, that Reform haven't proven that they really are a complete success just yet. They did well in the local elections, they're polling strongly, but can they stick the landing? Probably a topic for another video by someone else. But the fact this party has emerged in this fashion at this particular moment isn't the worst sign, and if the right gets a party that gives them what they want, well, why couldn't we have one? And that's a good question to ponder on as I consider some reasons why people say an entity like the Corb isn't really needed. There are a number of credible reasons that someone might have to say, another party? We need to put a stop to the creation of political parties until we can figure out what's going on. I want to focus on three, starting with an olive branch to a school of thought I understand. Of course, the first and obvious group who will be rolling their eyes will be people who aren't into electoral politics and are doing something else that I won't be too specific about. I'm not gonna name anything specific. Obviously, if you're in this category and you've made it this far in the video, you get it, and you're probably just checking in to see what's going on, or you just think I'm cute, which is fine. I'm happy with both of those. You're excused from any of the criticism of that way of doing politics, but I get it if you're like, yeah, this doesn't make a difference to me, and that's cool. I would just say that for most people, voting or some kind of electoral politics is either their way in or just all they can do or all that they will do. And it's probably important to have non-shit options available for people. That's really it in terms of the non-electoralists. I just want to give you all a nod and let you know, yes, I know you exist, and I think you're pretty cool without being too specific because I'm on youtube.com. The main argument that people will come up with against the necessity or efficacy of the Corb is the existence of the Green Party of England and Wales. And I'd say equally important is the existence of the Scottish Greens, but with apologies to the disproportionately Scottish audience I appear to have cultivated, which I really need to ask some more questions about, but okay, I'm going to set that to one side for now. But a lot of the basic shape of these arguments will still apply. Now, I have criticised the Green Party, endorsed them in a very specific way in 2024, and have defended them from what I think are unfair attacks. It's fair to say that I'm not in the tank for them, but I am willing to hear them out more than before, and with Zach Polanski looking like he has a good chance of becoming leader, I'm curious, let's put it that way, I'm curious. I've said in the past that I really want to like the Green Party because it'd make things a lot easier for me. And that's also kind of why people will say the Greens' existence complicates things for the Corb, who also I would like to really like because that would also make things really easy for me. The Greens very clearly occupy this left of Labour space now. And if Zach Polanski were to become leader, his platform of eco-populist leftism would certainly seem like a natural home to a lot of people who would also be taken in by the Corb. That being said, the Greens, despite the common perception that they're underperforming, do have a bit of a ceiling, and I'm not terribly convinced they're as far from it as people think. Partially this is because the party's current leadership have been ducking the big challenges, which Polanski seems a solution to. But part of it is just the Greens struggle to reach certain parts of the electorate that are left of Labour for a lot of different reasons. Whether that's just a credibility issue from their alliance with the Liberal Democrats, back in the Brexit days, the fact that there's still a perception of them as gardening Tories, and the party seemingly always being one internal election away from being taken over by transphobes. There are just a number of blocks that make people, especially those who were in Labour under the prospective leader of the Corb, just kind of recoil, because we've had to coexist in a party with these kinds of people before, and it's just kind of exhausting. There's always this danger of looking at the Greens as a ready-made structure waiting to be filled for our purposes. And sure, it's already set up, it's already organised, it has councillors and internal officers and all of the regular political party stuff. And it's supposedly a more democratic party than the others. So logically, all of us piling in there and filling it up makes sense. But that ignores that it has internal politics, internal factions, and there's a difference between disagreements among people in a new structure like the Corb would be, and one where people are entrenched institutionally. That produces a much more sort of desperately nasty and vicious atmosphere, because it is low stakes, but there's enough at play that people might really fight tooth and nail for it. I'm not saying that the Greens have a party culture anything like Labour did in 2015. I just want to be that would be a ridiculous thing to say. But it's not just an empty vessel waiting for us. It hasn't necessarily been built with what we need in mind, and some people just will not go for it. Some for petty reasons that I'll maybe talk about a bit later, and some because it's a step too far, or the Greens are just too distant from them and they can't close that gap. If the Greens were the sole suitable vehicle for this political energy, you'd think they'd have captured more of it by now, but they haven't, and I think there are some in the Greens who see this and think maybe there's some utility in something else being thrown out there. Another thing we'll talk about in a bit, we'll have to put a pin in that. The final school of thought I want to talk about is one that is largely discredited, but is inexplicably still promoted by some nominally left-wing individuals and organisations. The idea that the place of socialists is in the Labour Party, to stay and fight, to borrow a phrase. This is predicated on the mistaken assumption that the Labour Party can succumb to internal pressure to change its ways, which, given the nature of the political project of the leadership, I think most proponents of this have realised that it's not happening. The internal party structure has been altered to insulate MPs from the membership, and frankly, it's not a coincidence that the rules around leadership elections were changed, and then the press suddenly decided and started acting as if Labour were a legitimate governing party again. There's not really much to say here, other than if you're still in Labour, or if for some reason you're watching this and you're an MP and you're still in Labour at this point, and aren't at least planning on kicking the tyres on, not even the Corb, fuck the Corb for a second, but the Greens even. I don't know what you're for or what you want. There's no real argument to say that Labour is a suitable vehicle for any left-wingers. We tried it, it didn't work, it's okay to move on. What's different now that means the Corb or something like it may actually be necessary or effective? For one, the political landscape is different to 2019, when Change UK had their go. We truly have entered a period of multi-party democracy, or at least what appears to be multi-party democracy, where the way British people appear to be voting resembles a European proportional representation democracy rather than a traditional first-past-the-post democracy. And that has two interesting effects. One is that having this kind of party environment on the first-past-the-post means it's easier to win seats. Now, is it fair or representative that you can win a seat in Parliament maybe with 30% of the vote? I don't think so, but it is nonetheless the system as it exists, and you have to take advantage of it as it is. The time very much is now for that kind of attempt. In fact, you see it in the independents and some of the more credible performances by losing independents. They won more seats than the Greens in 2024 as an amorphous blob, and I think they clearly represented a similar, if not quite the same, body of opinion in the UK across all of these independent candidates. So why not give it some shape and see how that pans out? The other point is that there's clearly been a series of flashpoints that have alienated left opinion, and actually generally public opinion, from Labour. Whether it's Palestine, benefits, taxation, energy policy, the cost of living, nationalisation of certain industries, fiscal policy. There's just been a massive alienation of not just the left, but as I said, a large segment of public opinion. And there isn't some ready-made receptacle for this opinion in British politics, or at least one that is able to capitalise on it fully. Otherwise, we'd be having a very different conversation in this video. Clearly, there's a body of opinion that does not feel adequately represented by any existing party in the UK party political system. So shouldn't they get a party? Better yet, if this party is able to reach into these areas, and as Zach Polanski himself has indicated he's willing to do, it works in some kind of arrangement with the Greens, might it not be part of the solution here? That some combination, a red-green alliance if you will, can do the job of providing these frustrated parts of public opinion some kind of representation. In fact, if you look at where the Greens are polling at the moment, and where the Liberal Party was polling prior to the formation of the SDP, it's not a million miles away. Now, obviously, the rules are different for a split that aims to wreck a left leadership. The press will not shower the Corb in its love, as seen by a lot of the reporting already out about it. It's still worth considering that if an agreement can be struck, and my speculation is that if Zach Polanski does become Green leader, then it probably will be, or at least there'll be an honest attempt, that some kind of alliance can play to both sides' strengths and could actually build some bridges that maybe ought to have already been built. It'll mean a bit of swallowing pride, but frankly, would the people involved in the Corb have much choice, or even in the Greens? My thought here is, it's clear that in some fashion the Corb is a necessary exercise, not just because the conditions are there for it to succeed. The conditions are always there. Reform isn't succeeding because it has very good timing. It's succeeding because it's providing a vehicle for discontent in the electorate and providing the sensation of a solution to those problems that people think exist. It's also necessary because it might bring back some people who are otherwise inert to politics, but whose maximum extent and engagement is an electoral vehicle. Also, and I acknowledge this is petty, I'm sick of arguing about whether this could work or not. Whether it fails or succeeds, I think it's necessary for some of us to just have it play out so we know where we stand. Why not just try? What is there to lose, really, especially this far from an election? One of the immediate reactions to the Corb that I want to talk about is this notion that its existence is somehow a boon to reform. Former Labour leader and dickhead Neil Kinnock said that the Corb ought to be called the Farage Assistance Group, which abbreviates to something which I think he was signalling towards on purpose, given his time as Labour leader, but nonetheless, it does speak to an understanding of what the Corb's impact could be, namely that a greater evil will win if Labour lose the next election. There are a couple of reasons why I'm unmoved by this threat, and why my response to the idea that this will allow Reform to win is to basically go, no, it won't. Firstly, Reform are already ahead of Labour by some margin. A lot of that is just down to Labour being Labour. They are a right-wing political project that is trying to pander to the sentiments that boost reform. As it stands, they're losing anyway, and it's their own fault. And before anyone goes, oh, but it's the mean right-wing press, I was told, in no uncertain terms, that every Labour leader is treated badly by the press, that an inability to manage what was apparently just a fact of nature rendered one so incompetent as to be removed from all democratic politics. I was also told that Keir Starmer was a super forensic mega lawyer who was on top of all the details of all the policy and would be a technocratic master of government. If that's the case, then he and the project around him have failed. Any failure of Labour belongs to them, especially in the context of Starmer's political project being about repudiating, rejecting the left. This has been obvious pretty much from Starmer becoming leader, and he's basically gone on a one-person tour of telling the left to fuck off. In fact, here's a clip of him addressing the left who are unhappy with his leadership in 2023.
If you don't like the changes that we've made, I say the door is open and you can leave.
But now we're supposed to take the blame for taking his advice and leaving. The fact is that if Starmer and Labour's rejection of the left is costing them elections, then perhaps they ought to, I don't know, do something about that isn't scream at immigrants or support genocide. Not to reference Peep Show because it's a terrible, terrible centrist show, but if someone keeps screaming at you to fuck off, you do kind of have a right to fuck off. In fact, it speaks very poorly of Labour that the Corb is being treated as such a threat that it could upend Labour, especially when you consider the legacy of failure that splinter parties have had in recent years. If Labour can be forced into defeat by that, then it's their own damn fault. There's not much more to say than that, especially if your pitch is reform or worse. Like, you're in government. You have to prove that your method of governing, the philosophy you use to do so, isn't just, what if we were reform, but we did it with a frowny face? Given the repudiation of the left by Labour, which, as I said, means the Corp has any chance of actually making an impact, there's no real way to pin this on the left. Now, this is tongue-in-cheek, but given the public record on how left-wingers were treated in the Labour Party, blaming them for Labour losing is kind of victim blaming. As a bloc, the left has basically been told that their concerns don't matter. And in fact, rejecting those concerns is the cornerstone of winning elections, which is a really bad strategy because if your government hits trouble, say a really incompetent party management incident occurs, then no one is going to be around to defend you because you have no goodwill. You can't tell us to be afraid of reform when Labour just has a policy platform that's repulsive, supporting genocide, escalating social murder of disabled people, not taxing the rich, trying to remove trans people from public life, making the border regime even harder than it already was. Oh, I guess they banned ninja swords though, so they got that covered. Like, what is there to be afraid of under reform? That we'll have to see Nigel Farage's fucking frog face outside Downing Street? So fucking what? The left cannot at once be such an unpopular, weak and repulsive force that telling them to fuck off is an electoral necessity, and strong enough with popular support sufficient to cause Labour to lose elections. If you believe these two things at once, just pause and think about it, because they're pretty mutually exclusive, but also understand that this is how fascists communicate about the people who need something done about them. Perhaps this explains why the Corb and the Greens, and really any space away from centrist briefcase-wielding dickheads, are emerging. If reform wins, so fucking what? They're already winning. We've now had 2 summers in a row with race riots. The government follows their every whim. The Prime Minister echoed Enoch Powell in a speech on immigration. If the only thing stopping a complete reform victory is the colour of the Prime Minister's rosette, then it's already over, and we need to start doing something else. Otherwise, we'll be bringing a plastic spoon to a gunfight. I think some of this has come out in the things I've said earlier, but I do think there's a danger that the Corb becomes a way for a vague us to say, we told you so. And I get that it's really satisfying, but we absolutely cannot go around relitigating 2015 and 2019. I know I kind of did this for a while on the channel, and I think it was necessary in some way as a way to process. But did it really achieve anything? Not really. Look, I was there. I get it. It hurt my feelings too, and in fact, it probably pushed me over the edge into a little bout of depression. It sucks. And yeah, people being dipshits has probably led to a lot of problems that we have now. But it's just not worth it, and it's not going to work. Taking it personally is not how we're going to fix the problems. We have to be better than that. We have to be more than that. If we spend our time arguing about the minutiae of 2015 and 2019, the Corb is going to fail. In fact, if we brought that energy to literally anything, it would fail. No matter what form this all takes, no matter what your relationship to it is, don't, for the love of God, argue about stuff that happened over half a decade ago. I think a lot of us are tired of it. Not because it's not important, not because it doesn't hold some explanatory power as to how we got here, but because I'm 10 years older than I was in 2015, and everything's getting worse. I don't know that I can take being 41 years old and having to do this all over again, telling you all not to relitigate 2025 to 2029. We have to accept that what happened, happened, and that we have to play on this new terrain, whatever it might be, and whatever challenges that throws at us. If we don't, or if the people in and around the Corb don't, then it's fucked before it starts, because no one cares about whether you were right about Jeremy Corbyn. In fact, I'll do you one better. You probably, if you watch this channel, are right about him. But do you think anyone is going to give you the satisfaction of admitting they were wrong about him? No one wants to give an asshole who's rubbing their nose in it the satisfaction. That's why even if he does anything good, I will never give Keir Starmer credit. The best way to get that satisfaction is to actually win or fuck Labour over. Dealer's choice on that one. I'm happy with either outcome. This doesn't mean that we don't support the people whose lives were derailed by it all. Of course we should support each other. And we should defend ourselves, because a lot of the attacks on Corbyn and the looming attacks on the Corb are proxies for attacks on the entire left. We should defend ourselves from obvious lies like that. It also doesn't mean that we don't learn lessons, that we don't look at what happened and understand that there were things we could have done differently, and that we can do differently now, particularly about which figures we elevate and trust to lead, if indeed the Corb does coalesce into an entity where that's applicable. We need to be critical and serious about it, especially when the lines of attack are so clear, which brings me to some complications around this. The one thing I think we should avoid is treating the Corb like it's a revenge tour. We are not a sports team that's going on a rampage. That kind of energy is going to really cause problems that are kind of predictable, especially if we keep centering people who don't necessarily need to be centered in a new project. The fact that the founding of the Corb will involve Corbyn, and judging from some of the reporting around it, it was met with some resistance because of the co-leader structure, which would, I think, work better than solely having the old man as the leader, which was apparently the preference. It's pointing towards this being a relitigation instead of what it needs to be. I'm not saying there's no place for these people or for Corbyn, but the more prominent they are, the more levers they hold, the more that danger looms. Especially because the press will love nothing more than to force it to be a relitigation. If we're stuck in a position where we're arguing about things that happened last decade, how is the Corb going to actually do anything, achieve anything? Those days are gone. And I'd love to go back, apart from anything else. I was younger, but we can't. And we have to make our peace with that. What the Corb or any such entity needs to be is a party of now. We can't go back. but we can go forward. I have some thoughts about what that means that'll come up in the next section possibly, but the short version is it's going to require us to look at different people who have emerged since 2019, younger people who have really suffered the consequences of that failure, because that's what it was. Failure. The Corb shouldn't run away from that. We should acknowledge that even if the forces arrayed against us were impossible for anyone to overcome, failing to do so is still a failure. Maybe liberated from some of the albatrosses that were around our neck, it's easier in some ways now. But let's be honest about what we need to do and maybe close that chapter. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting or leaving anyone behind. It just means making a new normal for ourselves and acknowledging what we're up against and what we need to do to change it. This also doesn't mean that we can't criticize people for mistakes they've made. Plenty of people who are now enjoying prominence as opponents of Labour supported Keir Starmer, or at least supported the series of events that led to the left's marginalisation. Even though they mysteriously seem to agree with us on every issue, people do need to explain why they've changed their mind sometimes, and the fact of just being good on the policies isn't enough for leadership. But I think it's good enough for tolerance. We don't have to like everyone we work with, but we do have to at least be pulling in the same direction. The absolute worst of them, the people who are still clinging on to the long ashen straws of Starmer's going to pivot left. Look, you can in fact, and I think it is in fact your moral duty to laugh at them. But for most people, I'm not saying let's have an amnesty for being a melt, but let's allow people the chance to fuck up before we cast them out. If we're going to say people have no place with us, or within the Corb, or within anything, let it be for something that at least happened this decade. Maybe that's too much to ask, but we need to find a way collectively to just let it go. This all leads to the inevitable question, can it succeed, and what if it doesn't? Because a lot of people are, I don't want to say fair weather, but rely on some prospect of success before buying into something. The Corb has a lot of challenges and will need to overcome a lot of sentiments, and frankly, I'm not feeling especially optimistic about whether it's equipped to do that when there's someone, at least one someone, involved in leaking text messages and details to the Times. That alone makes me think that no lessons have been learned, and it has been a bit slapdash, if we're being honest. What I want to do is be constructive about it. Based on the information we do have, and point out some ways that it can maximize its chance of success. Because the answer to the question of can the Corb succeed is yes. Anything can succeed within reason. Could a left-wing party positioning itself in opposition to Labour's series of failures that seeks to actually harness public opinion into policy succeed in the UK? Why not? The public have been negatively polarised against Labour, and Reform do have the appearance of a paper tiger, to say nothing of how pointless the Tories are. This is the first time I've mentioned them in this video. Success in this context would be taking a five-party system and injecting some chaos into it, either as a sixth party or as an ally to the Greens. I would prefer it to be an ally of the Greens, because that would suggest to me that there's been more thoughtfulness about how to succeed than before, but it does take two to tango, and I accept that there are some on both sides who may not want to do that. Their loss, I guess. The question of the founding process of the Corb looms large in my mind, because it's hard to endorse something where the process has been this opaque. Some would say that's necessary at this stage because, well, look at what happened the second any kind of information hit the public sphere. But the actual foundation needs to meet certain criteria to maximize success. Firstly, this is speculation on my part, but it appears to me that some of the local independent groups on councils are having conversations around this. In fact, in his appearance on Robert Peston's talk show thingy, I don't know what it's called because I don't watch TV, the night before that infamous letter dropped, Corbyn himself named some local groups he was talking to, or at least cited them as examples. The process between these groups has to be properly democratic. If we're talking about backroom deals in getting the ball rolling, that's one thing, even if it's suboptimal. But in the actual process of foundation, it's going to blow up in everyone's face. And that's really one of the major anxieties that makes me think the Corb is already heading towards a brick wall. Some of these political forces have their own representation at the council level, if they're involved, and it's disrespectful to them and the people they're representing to force something onto them through deals. That's not to say that there shouldn't be discussion or debate, but it has to be done in a transparent way. The people who are supposed to be putting their efforts into the Corb need to know what's happened, why it's happened, and who advocated for this course of action. The other thing that weighs on my mind is that a lot of the figures around the Corb and its pre-founding are the same people who are around every fucking thing on the left and have the appearance of trying to wrestle control of the project for themselves, which is completely exhausting. And I just want to ask in all sincerity, what successes have some of these people had that they feel entitled to jockey like this for control? I do think it's quite obvious that there needs to be some kind of changing of the guard here. Yes, there's value in experience. Yes, there's a place for everyone who's willing to put their shoulder to the wheel. Within reason, obviously. But if your legacy is one of a series of hilarious failures and inability to organize a piss-up in a brewery, do you really need to be at the top? There needs, in so many ways, to be a mass swallowing of pride, whether it's about working with the Greens, which I think they really need to do, and I will keep emphasizing this point, or it's about actually letting go. Maybe these people intend to get the ball rolling, then hand it off to another generation or another group of people who have a fresh approach. I don't know. I'm not an optimist about that. A lot of people like the idea of being in charge more than actually doing what's effective. The left in Britain are not immune to this, no matter what we might believe, and there needs to be, quite rapidly, some actual democratic structures in the Corb, otherwise it's going to find itself on a collision course with that brick wall, and no one will be able to steer it away from the danger because the same people have ossified themselves into positions of power again. That's part of the reason why, if the rumours are true, I'm kind of not bothered by Zara Sultana apparently firing from the hip with her announcement. If it's what's needed to focus minds and to dilute the influence of people who have something to offer but not as leadership, then good. The mark of whether this is going to work or not is whether the people who are behind the shit show that it's reportedly been are willing to let go. Because there is talent out there. There are people who could really do some good in something like the Corb, who are stuck doing stuff well below their talents. The Corb shouldn't make the mistake of almost every other major party and waste the talents attracted to it by embedding people into positions that they'll never be moved from. All of that being said, what if it fails? So what if it fails? What do we really lose from failure? A bit of time. That's it, really. I think the absence of a project like the Corb has been felt arguably for a while, really since 2021, 2022, and I don't believe in a good time to do anything. That's not how politics or history or anything like that works. The opportunity is presenting itself, and assuming that they're able to get their shit together and cobble something together, what's the harm? What I'm saying is that fear of failure is pointless. I put a lot of effort into something that ultimately failed. I've actually done this more than once. Just look at the channel. Would you say that the story of this YouTube channel has been massive success after massive success? The one argument I think is the most pointless against the Corb or against anything is that it's doomed to fail. Nothing is doomed to fail. There are plenty of reasons why it might, and plenty of reasons why something might succeed. At the moment, it's speculation and thoughts. We have to wait and see. And that's probably the hardest part, but it's true. Which brings me to the final and most important question. Am I in? The rumours that have been swirling about this sound a bit like what I've said I would want all along, a kind of coalition of left local political parties that feed up into a national umbrella. To what extent it'd allow them the kind of autonomy I'd prefer or be what I want it to be at every level, I don't know. I'm really trying hard not to cry about getting what I wanted, because it's the one thing I can't stand. I do feel my enthusiasm is a bit tempered, both by the reporting, which we have to bear in mind. It's not the fact of the reporting, but the fact of the access that's allowed that reporting that's the problem, and by people who are taking it as an opportunity to go on a revenge tour. That being said, some Greens' positive reactions have made me think maybe this is the one time the British left avoid tripping over its own dick after 2 steps forward. Maybe. My honest feeling is I just don't know. I have no clue what the shape is going to be, and anyone who tells you they do is either lying or shit stirring, unless something's come out since the recording, which, that's my bad. My position is one of curiosity. I'd like to see how it plays out. Either it flames out horribly, in which case fine. We're where we were before, or maybe it's a game changer. Regardless, that's just some short... Actually, maybe not short now that I've reflected on how long this is. Oops. But some thoughts on it all, nonetheless. Thanks for hearing me out and hanging out, and I'll catch you on the next one. It's good to be back. Whew, okay, I need to thank my proofreader who read this on the night of recording to keep everything sort of nice and quick with this. Thank you very much to her. And I want to thank the 2 people who made edits of the Pondering My Orb wizard that will be one of the 2 thumbnails that you'll have seen when you clicked on this video. Great job by both of them. I love both. I couldn't pick, so I decided to put them in competition against each other. What are you gonna do? But they both did a fantastic job. I also need to thank the patrons and members. If you want early access to the videos, if you want to vote on the topic of the videos, if you want to get your name in the credits, or if you want to get your name shouted out, go to the Patreon, patreon.com/SKTheCrusader, and to get all of those benefits at once, you've got to go to the top tier, just like these people: Drone Riff, Mercutio, Kirsty Scheider, John N, Liron, Jar Jar Muba, and Carolyn. Absolute legends. They get all of those juicy benefits. And YouTube members get some sort of mix of all of the best benefits. It's a fluid situation with the YouTube members, but they get every video early. They get to vote. They get all of the cool stuff. And a special shout out to them: Nadir G1, Katie Marshall, Roger Zugi, Scaly Bubble, Ben Johnson. They are also absolute legends. Thank you to them. And thank you especially to all of the patrons and members, and to everyone in the Discord who have been super supportive, because I've had a really... quite a big bit of family news that meant I couldn't keep to the schedule I had planned, and I feel really bad about that. But I feel like this is a good return to youtube.com, and I hope you've all enjoyed it. And yeah, I'm gonna have to rearrange my schedule and stuff, so if you've been looking forward to something in particular, I'm sorry, it may not come out for a while, but I'm back. I'm happy to be back, and let's keep on winning. And to help me keep on winning, like and subscribe and share the video, all of that cool stuff, and I'll catch you on the next one. See ya!